My dad was a telephone man. He was a telephone man, and he was working in Los Angeles, actually down at um, Long Beach, North Long Beach, and it was a bad area, and so he put in for a transfer, and he had lived when he was a young man in Yakima, Washington, and he had his oldest brother who lived in Yakima, and so he got a transfer to Yakima, Washington in about 1955, 54, 50, about 1954, and we moved up there, and we they bought a house that had 10 acres, 10 acres, and I can remember I had to walk to school, and I thought school was a couple miles away because it was a long walk. And at that time, I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and I had to walk to school. And when we drove back there, I saw that it was less than it was only about 900 feet or something. It was very close. And I thought that the street that we lived on, White Hollow, we lived in the White Hollow area, and I thought the street was the widest street ever. And then when we got there, it was just a narrow street. And we had a big house, and I saw the house again, and it was a small house. And everything in my mind changed. In Yakima, I used to love the snow, and I would go with friends, and we would walk. There was a hill, and we would climb the hill, and we'd slide down on the sleds, and we had so much fun. Our feet froze, and we'd have to go back home and get more socks and stuff on our feet, and go back out again. But we just had rubber boots, and the rubber boots do not keep your feet warm in the snow. But anyway, it was a fun time, and we had sledding hills, and we would go down these big hills and slide on the hills. That was a fun time. Now, my dad, he was always thinking of ways to make money. And so in 1955, Colonel Sanders, Kentucky Fried Chicken, was coming to town. And so my dad knew that Colonel Sanders would need more chickens. So my dad bought 500 baby chickens, and they grew up, and we had 500 chickens. And then Colonel Sanders did not want his chickens. And so, with my aunt and uncle, Aunt Mary and Uncle Francis, came down, and with my mom and dad, and me, Joyce was too little, we killed the chickens, and we plucked the chickens, and we did all these things with the chickens. I mean, things like plucking them and stinking, and anyway, it was just not a fun thing. But I remember doing that. I remember that we had those chickens, and what did you do with chickens afterwards? Well, we were lucky enough that our neighbors had a frozen food locker. And so they had this locker that we would go over, and my parents, they rented a whole bunch of areas that they could put their chickens in. And so we'd have to go over there and put the chickens in, and when my mom, we had chicken, I think, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We always had chicken.
For how long?
Forever. And I was told, because I was a kid, that kids love drumsticks. And I hated the drumsticks because of the blood vessels that were in them. But that was what kids liked, you know? And so I ended up hating chicken. And you know what? All the time that we've been married, I have never fried a chicken. And that chicken, anyway, those were our chicken days. And I forgot to say that one time when the chickens, before they were butchered, my grandma and grandpa Hunter from Michigan, that was my mom's parents, they came to Washington to see us. And there was this neighbor dog that always kept trying to get into our chicken coop. And my grandpa was an electrician. And he said, I'll get those dogs. And he dug a ditch a narrow ditch, and because they would um, try to dig under that ditch, and he put some wires down there.
Oh.
And so the dogs came, and pretty soon we heard them howling all the way around. They were howling all the way back to their house almost. And, they never came back again. And that's, and so that's what he did. Okay, another thing with my dad, we have a pig. And we got this pig from neighbors, and the pig was actually a house pig. It liked to go into the house. And so we have this pig, and one night, a snowy night, our neighbors called and said, "Your pig is knocking at our front door." And so my dad put on his slippers and a coat and went to get it. And he held onto that pig on his hind legs, and it squealed, going down the lane that we lived on. Anyway, that pig did end up in the chicken coop that was no longer needed, and he ended up there, and you know what? He also ended up in our freezer. And so that was a pig. And then another thing, with my dad being a telephone man, we lived down the road, and the road made a curve, and if you didn't make the curve, you went down this lane that we lived on. And one night, it was actually a summer night, and we lived about 2 miles from the drive-in theater. One night, these boys and girls were out joyriding, and they did not make the curve. And they went down our lane, and they hit one telephone pole, another one, and so we were up without electricity. And my dad, being a telephone man and knowing how to climb the poles and everything, he went out and helped them climb the poles and help them get the electricity back on and everything. And so there was an article in the paper, and they thanked my dad for helping a telephone man for helping the electrical company. But these girls had high heels, and they walked where all these wires were, and they had to cross a creek, and anyway, they went back, and they got home. Their parents brought them back to the police officers, and they got in trouble. And so I don't think they did that many times. And that's one good thing, is that we did have punishments. They weren't abusive, they were just teaching us lessons. And that's something that kids today do need. They need to know what they could do and what they can't do. Not being physically mean, but they need that.